Chapter 3 of Red Dead Redemption. 2 is often remembered as the part of the story where the gang feels most alive, most unified, and most comfortable after the chaos of Chapter 2. But when you look deeper, Chapter 3 is actually the moment where the Linde gang begins slipping into a subtle but irreversible decline. This is the chapter where everything seems like it's finally going right. Better shelter, better food, more consistent money. But beneath the surface, almost every success plants the seeds of a much bigger failure that comes back to destroy them later. The gang relocates to Clemens Point, a quiet, swamp-side camp near Rhodes. On paper, the new location is perfect. The land is fertile, the water is close, the law presence is manageable, and the townsfolk seem more polite and easier to fool than the citizens of Valentine. For the first time in a long time, the Linde gang doesn't feel cornered. They feel like they have options. The biggest advantage of Clemens Point is its strategic position between Rhodes and St. Denis. Dutch sees this as an opportunity to rebuild the gang's strength. They can hit the Braithwaites, they can hit the Grays, and they can trade in the city. There's money everywhere. Dutch just needs to pick which pile to take first. But the issue is that Dutch starts thinking like a man who believes every opportunity is meant for him. In Chapter 3, he loses his ability to recognize a trap. Rhodes is calm on the outside, but it's a snake pit underneath. The Grays and Braithwaites have been feuding for decades, and instead of keeping the gang out of a war they don't understand, Dutch throws them into the center of it. At first, it looks like everything is working. Arthur and the boys charm Catherine Braithwaite and Sheriff Gray. Hosea plays both sides like a professional con artist. The gang is drinking in the saloon, walking through Rhodes like they own the town, and making money without attracting too much attention. This is the illusion. The gang is winning battles but losing the war, and none of them realize it. Another major piece of Chapter 3 is Arthur's growing maturity. It's one of the first chapters where Arthur becomes a genuine protector, not just a loyal soldier. His bond with Lenny deepens. His relationship with Mary Beth warms. He shows more patience with Jack Marston. Even Uncle gets more kindness from Arthur than usual. But this growing softness also opens Arthur's eyes to the gang's dysfunction. Lenny's grief over Hosea's advice, Sean's wild confidence, Bill's impulsiveness, Arthur notices all of it. And for the first time, he starts questioning if Dutch's way is always the right way. Meanwhile, trouble grows inside the camp itself. Pearson is stressed. The girls are restless. The Lemoyne Raiders lurk in the shadows, and Micah Bell, who was only a mild annoyance in Chapter 2, starts quietly working his way into Dutch's inner circle. Dutch begins listening to Micah more than Arthur, more than Hosea. And every time Arthur pushes back, Dutch takes it as disloyalty instead of concern. One of the earliest signs of Dutch's decline appears in this chapter. He stops respecting disagreement. Hosea tries to warn him. Arthur tries to warn him. Dutch hears neither. Then comes the moment that defines Chapter 3's downfall, Sean McGuire's death. Sean is one of the brightest personalities in the gang, a man who brought chaos but also joy and energy wherever he went. His death isn't just tragic, it's symbolic. Sean dies not in some heroic gunfight, but in a setup the gang didn't see coming because they underestimated how ruthless the Grays truly were. Sean's death marks the moment Dutch's plan officially collapses. The Grays had been manipulating them the whole time, and Dutch walked straight into it. The Braithwaites deliver the second blow, the kidnapping of Jack Marston. Catherine Braithwaite doesn't just take Jack, she destroys Dutch's pride. Dutch believed himself smarter than both families. He believed he could outplay old money, old grudges, and old politics. Instead, he gets humiliated, and the gang is forced into a desperate assault on Braithwaite Manor. They win the battle, but the victory feels hollow. They burn the manor, but it doesn't bring back Sean. It doesn't bring back Jack. It only shows the gang that Dutch is willing to escalate violence without thinking of the consequences. Even worse, Jack isn't even at the manor. He's been sold to Angelo Bronte, one of the most powerful men in St. Denis. Dutch's mistaken Rhodes now entangles the gang with a criminal empire much bigger and more dangerous than anything they've ever faced. The price for Dutch's arrogance is that the gang must now crawl into St. Denis and negotiate with a man who sees them as nothing more than low-class outlaws playing at being revolutionaries. Chapter 3 ends with a chilling realization. The gang is being pushed toward a future they are not prepared for. St. Denis is modern, organized, connected. Dutch isn't, the gang isn't. And Chapter 3 is the last chapter where the gang feels like a family. After Rhodes, they will never be the same again. The gang may have had money, resources, and a moment of calm at Clemens Point, but what they lost, Sean, trust, innocence, and stability, cost far more than anything they gained. The tragedy of Chapter 3 is that everything that went right convinced the gang that things were going to keep getting better, when in reality, every success was the first step toward the disaster waiting for them in St. Denis. Chapter 3 isn't the middle of the story, it's the turning point. The place where Dutch stopped learning, Arthur stopped believing, and the gang stopped being a family and started being a sinking ship. What makes Chapter 3 even more fascinating is how the environment itself seems to mirror the gang's slow unraveling. Lemoyne is beautiful, but it's also suffocating. The swamps around Clemens Point feel calm at first, but the longer the gang stays, the more those swamps become symbolic. Foggy, confusing, hiding dangers beneath the surface. Arthur's journal even reflects how the humidity and the stillness feel different compared to the mountains. It's a quiet place, but not a peaceful one. And it's in that oppressive atmosphere that tensions within the gang begin to evolve in ways almost no one expects. Kieran Duffy is one of the clearest examples. In Chapter 2, he's just the O'Driscoll who doesn't want to die. But in Chapter 3, Kieran becomes a genuine part of the family, helping with chores, bonding with the girls, earning Arthur's trust. Arthur doesn't say it out loud, but he starts to respect Kieran for trying so hard to fit in. The gang laughs with him, shares meals with him, and even protects him. His presence becomes a small reminder of what the gang could be, a place where people can change, where loyalty is something earned rather than demanded. But even here, the writers plant a seed. Kieran's growth is used to show the gang's growing vulnerability, because despite his efforts, he still symbolizes how exposed the gang really is. If they could turn an O'Driscoll into a brother, then maybe the lines they once swore by weren't so strong anymore. And in a world built on outlaw loyalties, blurred lines always come back to haunt you. Meanwhile, John Marston's frustration becomes more noticeable. His relationship with Arthur is still icy, especially with Arthur accusing him of abandoning the gang during those early rough months. But in Chapter 3, John's perspective shifts. The kidnapping of Jack shakes him to the core. It forces him to confront both his failures and his responsibilities. What makes this part so interesting is that Jack's kidnapping doesn't just move the plot. It exposes the cracks in Dutch's leadership that John had long suspected. You can see it in the dialogue. John watches Dutch more closely, listens more critically, and starts questioning decisions in ways he never dared to before. This is where the seeds of the events in Red Dead Redemption 1 are first planted. You can almost see the future taking shape in the smallest moments. The chapter also marks a turning point in Dutch and Hosea's partnership. These two built the gang together like brothers, but in Chapter 3 you can sense Hosea quietly pulling back. He doesn't argue loudly with Dutch. He simply observes him, analyzes him, and tries to subtly guide the gang towards safer paths. Hosea's missions in this chapter always involve brains, not bullets. Fishing with Arthur, scamming the Grays with charm instead of violence, gathering intelligence instead of forcing outcomes. But Dutch, influenced by Micah and the thrill of bigger scores, starts choosing the opposite path. More gunfire, more risk, more pride. Chapter 3 is where the contrast between Dutch and Hosea becomes the clearest. One wants escape, the other wants victory, and that difference will eventually destroy them. Even the smaller story beats carry weight. Javier begins acting more like a soldier than a brother. Bill becomes increasingly insecure, constantly trying to prove himself. Uncle becomes less of a lazy comic relief character and more of a reminder of how fragile the gang's morale actually is.